Heart for Kids has always led short-term mission teams. It's a part of who we are. It's a part of our DNA. Mission teams bring change for the kids that we serve, but also change for the team members. I'm a walking testimony, if you like, of the change that happens for team members, because until my first team in 1996, I had no intention of being a part of a ministry of this nature. But that first team, as we went around to villages in southern China, changed my life. I was told that we would be invited into people's homes, that they would offer us a glass of tea, and we would just talk about life. And to be honest with you, I struggled to see that, to believe that that's what would happen. But in fact, that's actually what happened. And as we talked around those glasses and jars of tea, I learned of people's beliefs. The belief that certain rocks are their gods for certain aspects of their life. The belief that a certain tree in the village is their god for their village and their community. That life, it was explained to me, is not much different and not much more valuable than that of a candle. That it's burning away one minute, that it's snuffed out the next, and it's forgotten about the next. These were life-changing conversations and cups of tea for me. My second team was to an orphanage, and in a very, very different way, that totally changed me as well. And my focus ever since has been towards the kids' work and the orphanage ministry. I'd like to tell you a couple of stories of early experiences of mine. But first, I'd just like to share with you about a movie that I watched just recently that really took me back to my early days in China. It was the movie of a story of a young Chinese lady who really just wanted to be successful. And success was about a comfortable home and a good income. She married an American businessman who was in the country at the time. And it seemed like things were heading down the path that she expected. But then her path took a change. As I watched the children in that movie, my memories, if you like, were taken to a distant time, my earlier years in ministry in China. And as I saw the kids in the movie, I saw kids in the orphanages that I'd met, that I'd engaged with. And I want to tell you the story of a couple of these kids. The purpose isn't to cast a shadow over the authorities at the time. I'm not interested in that, to be honest. The purpose isn't to tell you the worst, most impacting, most shocking stories. I'm not interested in that either. What interests me is sharing with you the needs of these kids and the way that they impacted us as we impacted them. It's not about names and locations. So obviously, the names I use won't be the kids' real names. So come with me into this orphanage where we had been going for some few years. It wasn't the worst conditions I'd seen. It had been improved and worked on since we had first gone into the home that was to become the orphanage. But it was still quite run down, even though it was new. Things were still broken, things were still falling apart, and things were still unsafe. But there was this little girl that I'll call Bo. She was about 7 or 8 years old. She was a solid, muscular little girl. She would not be called petite in any way, but she was such a loving little kid. Her eyes would lock on yours, and it was like she could reach in and grab your heart through her eyes. One day I was sitting on the concrete floor, had a team member on one side, we were just chatting about events of the day, and on the other side another child was just playing. And then I heard this squeal of laughter from across the other side of the room. And as I did, I looked up, thankfully, because I saw in that instant that Bo was running towards me. She had her arms outstretched. She had this laugh emanating from her, this smile that just engaged with you. And she launched herself. She was just a couple of meters away, 2-3 meters away from me when I first saw her. And then she launched herself into my hands, into my arms. Now remember, I said that she's not a lightweight child. So when she landed, I felt the impact. I reeled back against the concrete wall behind me as this little girl landed on me. But you know what was more impacting than the feeling of her landing was the impact of her love, of her smile, of her laughter. Bo had the ability to reach in and make you laugh, even though she had grown up in such horrendous situations. There was a little boy that I met in another orphanage. He had been impacted by the earthquake of 2008. This earthquake, remember, was measured at 7.9 or 8 on the Richter scale. It struck some 19 kilometres below the surface, and when it did strike, it thrust the earth upwards about 9 metres. That's a powerful earthquake. There were some 90,000 people killed or missing, presumed killed, through that quake. Happened in moments. Some 5,300 of them were children. Innocent kids who had, for the most part, just gone to school that day and were sitting in class when the earthquake struck. Well, I met this little boy who had come from the area of the quake, having lost everybody near and dear to him. And he had been moved to this orphanage in another province. He didn't know anybody. He was scared, he was angry, he was in pain, and he was not joining in with children or staff or volunteers or anybody. All we could do was to give him time. He would lash out at kids or people who tried to get too close to him. He would run away from them. But eventually, as time passed, as team after team came in, this little boy went from being a distant over in the other side of the play area to coming closer and closer and closer, to standing in the circle, but not part of the circle, to eventually sitting with the kids, but not joining in, but to eventually joining in the activity. He started to stand just a couple of meters away from me. And then I noticed that he was moving closer and closer. And one afternoon, I was standing outside in the play area, just watching the kids playing games with our volunteers. And suddenly I felt this little hand take my hand. He was right beside me and he had just reached out to hold my hand. I didn't, move much. I didn't really acknowledge him at first. I didn't want to put him off at all. But after a few minutes of us just standing there and him just standing, holding my hand, I just gave his hand a little squeeze to let him know that I knew he was there. These are just two of the kids from that era. There were many. And these kids, whilst it was a privilege and an honour to serve them, they impacted our lives as well. You know, I never had a team member who came to me afterwards saying, David, that team, it did nothing for me. It didn't change me. It didn't make me think about things differently. That honestly has never happened to me, having led some 55 teams to Asia. I know the power of short-term teams. I'm, as I said, a walking testimony. But at the moment, our teams can't go. We're in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. Sadly, the kids in country, they don't really understand and comprehend what a pandemic is necessarily and why their friends and volunteers aren't showing up as normal. But my prayer is that as things change, as travel restrictions are eased and we can again travel, that people will be ready and raring to go, if you like, to take that plunge again, to take that risk of changing and being changed. And so perhaps you're part of the future change for these kids. Perhaps you're part of the next team. I don't know. Pray about it. Think about it. Let us know if you want more information. But beyond that, be aware of just the kids that we serve and the amazing kids that these children are. Having lived through horrendous activities and events, they change our lives. Sometimes I think more than we change theirs. We're helping kids rewrite life stories and turn around futures. And perhaps you're part of that in a future team.